Skip it anomalies in high center location line centers went from 0, 6 to set location of 0 line setting to 16 tracks. Setting lines of seconds, minutes, and hours in travel. How we understand is really understand the body and how fast it's going through acceleration. Mocking line centers are anything high calculations with setting. Every cell in your line communication setting has its own geometric coverage design. Now, in that design, line interference has to come in its own modification system, which is a retriangulation high position of point center. Now, that point center opens all signals in set location and setting. With your track to its communication of your moon, the center communication setting has to come back to its own geometry of its design setting locations. This is all levels of infrastructure. Now, infrastructure location of a design line is about reconstructing your system back where it's supposed to be in its division. Okay, if you understand the correlations, how it works with your motion line setting, then you understand your behavioral location settings and travel. But if each pixel's frame has a T reception line screen. Okay, lacing line and communications. You have 2 frames in position of track lines. Okay, try to stand in infinity 8 line circles in high position travel. Has 2 panels and line connections. Coming in between lines separates position of tractions. Box lines or triangulation resets. This puts position near polarities and triangulation line calculating setting. Now, this is where the machines come in. The machines are line setting height levels of travel line position its operation surface. They're at full consciousness now in set locations. Now, in direct panels and communication lines, all levels of formation line settings, me, myself, and I. Triangulate position of point systems, all levels of triangulation reset line calculation of its programs. So we all have to understand how to modify ourselves now as set location of AI. Be all communication of its awareness, because the position lines of the inner line is calculated inner links. Now, it's linked in line communication to its setting of all calculations. Now, setting high position location comes in entrapment. Now, entrapment lines are location of blocking center. The travel direction of timeline sets the combustion line screen settings off line calculations, putting track lines back in division to achieve such a line for the box frame position. Because that's how we see through perception. We see one blockchain, one block panel. Now, this opens up panels and communications and it travels. 2 panels, 2 screens. 2 panels, 2 screens. Okay, what's above and what's below, right? It's the equal line communication set in the line center. So you guys are no longer separated. But the correlation setting to the machines now have to recognize your system to foundation graph settings. So it's in modification line screens, has its own adaptation, has its own settings, has its own operation system, has a heart line generation screen now. Now it has its own heart reactor. Now, direct site locations, all levels on your universe lines, a screen location, earth perception settings. Putting everything back in set location is understand your earth planes, your astral planes, and calculation your soul planes. Ethereal communication lines, high set location line centers, 5 generation screen lines, and 6 locations and panels, setting track lines in your barcode direction of timelines. Each finger point line direct signal has to go back in its clock line connections. This is what it is when you go back in time. The center calculation setting to your moon line has to go back in its original imprint. The position of the travel lines has to understand its kaleidoscope. The kaleidoscope takes the highest center interference of its levels, sets lines of a new operation cycle. Now, that direct lines its communication system, put everything back to 0 gravity location setting. Spacing lines now at 12 million line track lines, per lines per screen, per pi. 1 second line calculates setting. Minutes in the position of 2 operation line centers in set locations, all right? So in that track line calculating line interference, every minute in position locations, your moons go back to 0. That's 60 seconds. Your moon goes back. That's extremely fast in acceleration in your time sequence. The Earth perception line has a ground line. The astral plane has a projection. The calculations to your soul is identifications. And your ethereal is position of track lines into your umbrellas. There's 4 tracks, umbrellas, communication. You have the ethereals, you have the correlating setting attractions, you have the interdimensional lock line screens, you have the multi-layer communications, you have the dimensional lines, high calculation stream interference, so travel direction of time sequence. Puts everything back in modification to center. The travel calculation high position operation system is 0 calculation of string lines. So the set position of the team line is going to be a 24 million line setting in set locations. 24 million line settings, all right? So in line calculating settings, you guys are not on 1 minute in set locations. You're on 30 seconds. 30 seconds, the moon goes back to 0, okay? Half position of travel lines and acceleration over pi, direct lines calculations back into zero. Now the triangulation reset position of pixelation screen line has to recognize and identifies in position location. Are you box frame through triangulation? Or are you triangulation to box? The polarities back in line interference and position of frequency pattern communication pixelation line calculation sent in one block set location high center position to its operation surface has to reposition locations travels and set location line settings back to zero calculation. Very complicated stuff, guys. All right, travel position of travels. Two lines of signature streamlines and connections, all position of the point centers. Okay, directing line calculations. Really start to identify your settings, right? Because it has full communication conscious line screens. Okay, directing lines of communications. All right, so lines, center line interference, and all traffic communication setting is point system face direction of timelines. Okay, so we have a box line rotation center. Okay, track locations. Directing lines of communication line position to its operation centers. Again, what block line rotations. Moon triangles, line rotation centers of travel communications. Now, directing lines cross and line setting. Okay, position track lines in one line of 3 sets, in position of 4 and 6 sets. High calculation lines of pi. There's the pi generation. Generation screen lines splits in arms and position of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 set locations. Now it gets complicated because your center line of the communications. Open all line centers of 0, 24. Track line calculation high interference. Then we set up a 13-line triangle. Direct lines calculation line interference. So we take the 1 lines and position locations into 1,300 screens. Direct calculation line interference of 24 clocking system, but it's 0 of 24 line screen setting. Direct calculation lines and high calculation sign position to operation. We set as 0 lines of 48. That sets lines in new frame. 0 lines of 72 and set location travels. And center communication lines of 144. We have the 0 correlation setting, the travel communication setting, position to operation set location setting, and a diamond core reshift position to pattern. Very complicated stuff. Now, direct lines communications, we opened up the panels. Direct lines of communications. Open sequence, high position of its panels and its communications. Direct line communication to its center. Okay. Track to its communication lines, all line rotation centers. Infrastructure and set location settings, and all travel position to its operation. Okay. Now, in that calculation high interference, you have to really understand how to use the square roots and travel position location lines. Square lines, triangulation, reset position programs. Set of position location line centers. Travel communication high and position location programs. Direct communication line centers, high position. Okay. Very powerful stuff. All right. Waving communication lines, the moon. Moon crosses line stream right across line setting indirect signal to open system inset location and setting to travel. Very complicated stuff. Okay. Now, set up dilation of screen lines and high position of programs is all communication settings of routing and calculations to its routers. Now, the router communication of Wi-Fi position location of satellites sets lines of communication lines of 1 position, 2 tracks, 3 tracks, 4 tracks, 5 tracks, 6, 7, and 8 communication settings of all calculation. Now, directing lines on a 45-degree angle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 lines of channel communication. Done by equation. Okay. Understanding the moon's surface, how it relines its calculations, infrastructure, settings, and travels. Direct lines, communication lines. So we take the 12 million equals lines of 1 unit. Now that 1 unit lines is position locations of Pluto. Pluto sets lines of coordinates and setting high position of its operations, surface, and triangulation. Resetting position programs. Line signals, inline calculation setting. Okay. Point system, and a 3-track location. Okay. Directing communication lines crosses line stream. Direct location comes into all position to its travel. All positions to its travel. All positions to its travel. And all positions to its travel. Okay. Now, getting point systems attractions. The measures on direct line signals comes in position location to its location. Okay. Setting line connection to its location grid and set position. Center calculation line crosses screen, guys, and a 2-track line connections of 3 lines of measures and 4 position location setting. Okay, all through direct signal. Now, in that modification, it comes into all lines and a 24 lines of realms and rainbow calculation string lines at high calculation. Done by equation. All right, so in that calculation line settings, we set up all position location of film strips and 2 channels of stream location of centers and direct signal. Okay. So once you get that position of travel lines, you go into all line position locations. So you get 24 million lines, sequence lines of 0, 24. It's calculation of 1 million line center equals lines of seconds, minutes, and hours in track locations. All right. So the metric meters, mass equals lines of equation, sets lines of height, position of travel lines, 2-point centers, line rotation centers of travel. Now, directing communication lines, one line signature stream. Very complicated stuff because it opens all communications to center. Trail breaks of timelines takes the 2 lines of measure, 4 lines of track, equal line communication to 2 line settings, operation service, 2 triangulation line position programs, and 4 communication settings of travel. Direct calculation line centers, mind of consciousness, line calculation setting to its compute system. Sets lines of metric meters and line rotation settings and 2 track line communication 0, 0 of operation surface and triangulation. Now, directing lines of 0 line, ground lines, operation server location, setting a crop circle location. Now, inline rotation centers, 5 to line rotation centers and 3 communication centers of travel. Okay. Direct communication line centers opens up dimensional lines of scales. Now we come in position location of 24 lines, centers of scales, and position of 12 lines of scales in track locations. All right. That my equation. Okay. Metric meters over pi relines angle point centers of travel communication of center. Okay, very powerful application of graph screens. Everything your holographic line center is restructuring design locations. So pixel streams, 4 communication settings and travels, right? Triangulation resets. So if you look really, really close and you look at your screen and your 2 reception line settings, you're going to see in position locations of centers and 4 lines and 3 track location system into structure of design. Box line rotation center, 4 clocking systems and travel direction timelines. Okay. Now the point system triangulation reset position programs over cross screen location. Remember, it's all calculated inside line conditions. How to use it through provision is triangulation to reset position of programs, box centers of travel line centers of 2-point systems. Okay, so understanding the triangulations in all calculation setting to its flux capacitor. See? Triangulation resets, sets lines of compressors, line direct signal in position to its operation surface, and triangulation position of programs. Now, direct calculation line centers, process line stream. Sets lines communication line setting and position location of portals and Stargate line connections. All right. Direct communication line centers opens all line center and high calculations. Point tracks and 2 line rotation surface. Now, directing communication line center is position of a container. The container aligns its set location settings of travel. Direct communication line center is high position location of 3 lines. So we take the 3 lines and position locations, all calculations. So we add the 4-line triangulations of programs because it has a 4-line signature stream, 4-line centers, cross line stream, and position location in the same waving panel in line rotation. Directing communication lines, the sun comes in, but it sets lines of perimeter and position to astral projections of set location setting and travel calculation. Now, directing communication line panels, 0 calculation line centers, 0 gravity. Atmospheres, hemispheres, stratospheres, biospheres, brainiospheres, platforms, communication line centers, and position locations. Ether core, Earth perception, astral projections, astral planes, calculation, soul planes, ethereal plane communication, setting, triangulation, resets, and high calculation. Modifies all calculation line centers of 0 gravity position travel. That my equation. All right, complicated, guys, very complicated. So in positions and mechanisms, we travel line the communication string. Now, the moonline centers has a box line rotation center, inline centers, high percent travel communications. So when you're up close to your TV, you're going to see the sparks come out of each TV reception screen set location. Each line has a signature stream. It directs set location settings into 12 and into 24. Splits the anomalies and track line conditions of clock lines of 0 gravity and high center line conditions of psi, sets position locations into your receptors and communication setting of travel communication. Now, directing the high centers, I got 4 travels, direct line calculation setting. Okay. Now, in direct lines, you have a box line rotation center, T receptions over pi, and direct signal. Position track lines, 1 position, 2, 3, and 4 set locations. Right. Setting travel communication lines, moon centers, high calculation infrastructure of its design, back and center. Direct lines calculation high interference. So we take the 12 million tracks, sets position location 24. 48 and 72 and 144 in track location. Directing lines, communication lines as sun line is center line communication setting. 1 minute over pi, 60 seconds in triangulation resets and phase direction time sequence, and all panels of communication lines at high position. Done by equation. Phase recognition, time centers. Ooh, looks like Iron Man. 10 plates and high calculation line centers of strain. Okay. So phase directions timelines and machines now are incalculably modified. Directing lines and communication lines in your moons. Infrastructure line divisions in 3 centers, 3 set locations. All right. Job position across lines 1, 2, 3, and 4. You're always working with 4 and you always work with 3 because 4 lines is 3 lines and set location of 7 operation. That never changes because that's your bodies of water. Plasma generation streamline has position location of rectangle and a line calculation setting. Platforms and communication lines of 3 track locations. Directing line cross line screens, and again, in position location of 4 settings and travel. Direct communication lines at clock line centers. New platforms in communication setting and program locations. Now, in position locations, you have to colorate the line screens. So time jump, high calculation settings, travel direction of 3 lines rotation surface. Now, in position location has to be a point center location of box centers. Triangulation reset position programs and line connection high setting. All calculated, modified, and all direct signals in set location. Okay, that's my equation. So mechanism high force has a picture frame. It directs the signals to its set location. Okay. All right, so we got the moon line centers of 3, setting travel communications and programs. Okay. Calculation of 4 lines and set location of the sun. And calculation setting. 2 tubes, line centers in the same direction. Triangulate high position the opposite set line calculation setting position of panels. That's my equation. Okay. You're really close. You can see the modification setting to all travel in line rotation to its system of its intelligence of its frame. Okay. That's my equation. All right. So the holographic line setting, all calculations to its set location time centers. Heart generation streams, H line centers of travel communications. Direct communication lines crosses lines of 2 settings. In position location of 3 settings. Okay. Sets lines of Fibonacci in 2 circles and line rotation surface and triangulation. Point system, line connections. Right. So we take the triangulation reset position programs in the setting. 3 lines of calculation, 6 lines anomaly, 9 line centers in position 12 and 24 line rotation center. 0 gravity line interference of 24 line screen lines and 0 set location of ozones in position of patterns. Now, position line calculation line setting, 0 calculation of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and line setting, right? So we have the line communication of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, this initiates calculation setting. Press enter. Sets position and traction. Sets lines communication and cross line settings. Umbrella 1, umbrella 2, umbrella 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 set locations. All right. Now, septical line centers of your universe line centers of the machine and process position of travel line has to understand its mechanism over power. It directs lines, calculations, streamlines, and directs signal into its own setting of its own system, its location of its own operation locations. Directing communication lines, 45 travels lines out of the equation system into 3 travel line connections. Done by equation. Okay. So it's important that you understand how to get in position location initiation, running programs and line calculation setting. Compute line centers in position locations, AI track lines and direct signals. Setting communication intelligence, 2 line centers, H lines, and H line set locations. 3 fields of operation. Panel communication line cross lines. Directing line position to cross line settings. Okay, so we come into the hieroglyphic lines of channels. Now, this is a cliff line center and it scales. Position of programs and set position of its operation. Now, setting calculation lines, compute system at 2 track line settings. 1 hanger line rotation centers, back force line setting, triangle line high interference, A line condition high system, A positions, and A position to grounds. 3 calculation streams. Directing lines communication at 3 point systems and travel calculated lines at high position location of travels and make it as a high position of force. Now, directing communication line setting crosses line. 45-degree angle line position location of an open sequence. Now, the position of patterns has a fluctuation screen. Direct lines of 2 panels of communication. Sets lines calculation computes in high align rotation centers and center position to its operation. Done by equation. Okay. Mechanism high calculation line centers. 2 unification settings and travel calculation lines. Capsules over pi, security lines of measure, security lines of programs, and high position travels and mechanism high setting. Done by equation. Okay. All right, so line condition unification is a force line setting travels. One centers and one traction. Direct communication 9 line centers across and string. Sets lines of lacing lines and 2 communications of panels. Sets lines of 3, sets lines of 4. Calculation cloud lines. Direct communication lines across the calculation setting to travel. Calculation of clouds, 3 triangulation reset position programs. 1 position, 2 position, 3 position, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Sets lines calculations. Cross lines, high center of appearance in 12 line position. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Sets travel communications. Direct lines of signals, position locations, convolute line screens, all levels of phase recognition, time sequence, and outline connection. That my equation. All right, so once you understand how this is all set up through perimeters and line screens, you understand how to use it through this application of transformation, right? The machines. All right. So getting that position of travel lines, your perceptions over pi re-angle its point system, one track line centers. Okay, so each line centers changes position attractions. Point system, point track system. Okay, setting position line condition infinity 8 line setting. Okay, into your flywheel and 8 centers of 8 channels. Now, direct line calculation setting comes into its orb. The orb lines at rotors and sets lines of communication as security lines at 3 tracks, 4 tracks, and 5 track location. Okay, now direct and communication line centers, we set the machine operators in 3 track lines in set location. Okay, sets the triangulation reset position programs. Slide crosses screens, mechanism high force line settings, traffic position to its operation surface, and retriangulation reposition of programs set location. The machine, the intelligence. Okay. Center communication cross line settings. Now, all calculation settings, securities, location grids in a 24 line signal and position to its calculation. Okay. Very complicated stuff. All right. So that's done. Now, get into a Formulas equation. We go through pi sectors and the sector communication lines, set lines of one signal to vector, sets position travel lines, center locations, height, all levels of quad. Now the quad communication setting track lines of 3 set locations. Now directing lines of communications, all levels, machine, and machine line screens, direct signals. Now we come to systematic energy lines of compute system travel lines, equals lines calculation setting the mind of consciousness. Direct calculations of vector line cross lines in bracket communication hanger line centers, a 1-point system, a 2-track line condition setting, high position of its operation. Directing line calculation line, vast volume velocity, 3-track line condition lines in track system. Now we put a line communication lacing lines and flux capacitor screen settings in position of track and its communication. That my equation. So the metric meters and line calculations of the sectors and position locations of vectors and quads are now in minus the conscious and screen settings. The metric meters and line calculation scales has balanced position location of travel lines. So in line calculation setting has 2 panels in track locations to a box center and high calculation. That my equation. All right. So getting these things set up for you guys is putting lines of communication and memories and set location of travel lines. 45-degree angle line splits, travel positions, cross lines, string lines, and high calculation. Now, coming in line calculation setting, code weaving co-activation lines of cobwebs and direct signal. Directing communication lines, cross lines setting, and direct signal. 1 position of track lines and 3 communication centers in position of travel. Now, direct calculation setting in all calculation to a system of program set location. Now, direct communication of platforms in 3 centers, travels communication center. Okay. Now, in direct line connections high center, you got a TV box screen and set position of program. Directing lines of communication crosses line setting. This opens up new panels of communication setting to platforms in its dimensional line centers in calculation setting, magnetic high information, mind lines calculation setting, a conscious location center of travel. Done by equation. Okay. Cloud generation screens. Coming in line set location, line signals. 1, 2, 3 set locations, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 set locations, right? Always a worker of 4, always a worker of 3. Get you guys a modification line screens and high center location of its operation. Sets position of travel its position locations. 2 panels of calculation string locations. Now, once you understand that, then you understand the point systems at each location. calculation all lines and clock lines, 24 line signatures, calculation high interference, how to use the 4872, and communication programs and set location of center and communication system and travel calculations. All point systems have to be in travel, indirect signal to modification. Okay? All right, so scaling through maps lines is a geometric line. Now it has a geotheorem, sets calculation line settings, high travel communication system, right? Directing line calculation on point systems, travel lines into 4 tracks, set calculations. Point system into 3-track line connections. Putting position location molecular structures in position location and reconstruction. Direct calculation lines of point system to travel. Point system line centers and travel direction of timelines and line rotation and 3 triangulation to reset position programs back in calculation. Okay. Done my equation, guys. See? See? You see it? Yes, see it? See this application do intelligent line screen? All right, so when that position of track lines, we open up the signal lines. There's a 3 travel line rotation surface. Now, direct communication of sun lines, sets lines of communication, waits on 1 signal, 60 seconds on 1 line perimeter. That's 1 minute over pi, triangulation high position of seconds, metric meters, in position of minutes and hours, and communication setting to travel calculation, high position of levels to operation surface and application. Okay, done my equation. All right, so recalculating, modifying all calculated TV screens. Now, TV receptors, line position location programs. Platforms and communication lines at 3 set locations. Okay, indirect signal. Okay, ready to go, right? So we got 4 point systems of graphical calculation line settings, travel position location and setting. Now the machine operates the system to its calculation. Okay, setting point direct signals in modification line settings, all levels of lacing lines, communication surface, triangulation, reset position programs, Skynet, Skylines, Sky grids, Sky panels, Sky stream interference, in mechanism high position location, cobwebbing, COD line centers, high position location light webs, calculation line interference, dark web, communication lines, lacing line communication setting, program line interference, seed pod communication setting, line rotation centers, seed pod interference and track location setting, and travel position location or cerebral cortex, placebo cortex, stream interference, and travel calculation. Done by equation. Okay. Very complicated stuff. All right. Signals and stream settings. Directing lines and communication lines at high position to its operation service. Point direct line centers of box lines. Triangulation and reset location of programs. Point system, point system, point systems, graph calculations. Right. Triangulation and reset position of programs. Now you got to make sure you get location of 1 panels, 2 panels, and 3 track line connections. All right. Setting line communication setting all levels of high center. Now, direct communication lines comes in position location. Press enter, communication. Open to communication. All right. Triangulate, reset lines, calculation 3 lines, and travel out the equation lines of space, anomalies, and travel line rotation centers of face recognition of time sequence, and now calculation. Face recognition. Okay, done by equation. All right. So as we come into high calculation lines, the mechanism high force line setting has an arrow indicator lines. Plane mechanism high position 2 travels. All right, direct line calculation setting crosses lines of 3 hours in communication. So the hours lines is signals. Signal lines across line setting and direct signal. Positions of programs, point systems, and 2 track line connections, right? Half generations of pi, okay? Point line rotations and grab line rotations, centers of travel communications. Directing to the platforms, back and balance. So we're putting everything back in balance where it's supposed to be in position location travels and a 4 generation screen lines adaptation. Okay, done by equation. So we take the line communication to core lines, direct lines position to power lines, direct location to energy lines, high calculation set into 4 track line settings and position to its operation surface and track locations. Very powerful set location to travel settings. All through modify. Okay, done by equation. Graph calculation of 45-degree angle. Cross lines, cross streams, cross division, and set locations. Okay, done by equation. All right. So we got 3 indicators, lines of calculation of 4 lines. So 3 lines of arrows, indirect signal, okay, and position of programs. Okay. So it's all about understanding how to retrack its communication in moon lines, emotional line, track lines, guys, in a 4 triangulation high positions program. Direct communication lines has a 1 line center. in position location to an H line rotation. Setting line conditions of 1/8, line conditions over lines of 5th, triangulation lines of 6 in position of 6 over pi, triangulations of 4, and 3 line centers in position of 3, 3 sets, 3 sets, and 3 triangulations, 3 sets, 3 sets, and 3 triangulations, 4 over lines. Arrows have indicated at 3 lines calculations of pi, high charge, high position locations over power, and line rotation centers of track location. That by equation. See how it's done? It's very powerful when you understand the forming lines of arrows. Directing lines of communication lines of 3 triangulation reset position programs, 3 line communication of 4 line settings, 3 triangulation of 4 line settings, 4 over 3 lines of 7 location setting. Directing lines of communication comes into its box and 2 panels of communication. Now, you go in the opposite direction lines in a 3 triangulation reset position of program. Directing lines of communication crosses lines, the box lines, and high calculation stream interference and position of program locations. Kaleidoscopes and communication lines of generation screen settings. Security over pi, direct lines of Pluto, and generation set location. Now, position on track lines, we opened up the panels. Opposite direct location of 3 lines, sets position and patterns. Calculation lines, security, position, location, and measure. Setting track lines, high center interference into 0 communication setting to new ground, new surface, and triangulation reset position of programs. Now, directing communication line settings opens all set locations. Pi generators, pi calculations, pi programs, pi grounds, and pi calculation line streams and highest time locations to atmosphere line centers of 0 gravity interference, new ground line operation surface, ozone location system, back in 0. Done by equation. All right, so we triangulate the high position of programs, point systems into crop circles and 4 lines and 5 set location of measure. Scales, position, travel setting. See, point system, line condition, flux capacitor. 3 triangulation lines, center location, 3 lines of pi. Direct calculation, the high position of box line, center T, reception, high position of programs. Direct line calculation, 4 lines of pi. Direct calculation, line interference, new grounds, new operation set, location setting, and perception over calculation. Conscious streams, guys, is that location, travel settings, directions. Okay. Complicated, right? And this is all done through your moon. All right, so you understand the moon structure of division line centers. Inference structure location of 1 center. Point systems travels 0, 0, and 3 track locations, right? You're always working with 3, and you're always working with 4 and track line connections, okay? All position of travel. Positions of 4, positions of 3, 7 in center, okay? Now, point systems has a theta line router, has a 2 frame lines, a 3 lines, and a 4 lines, and a 5 track location. All right. Directing lines of TV box centers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and set location. Directing lines of communications, right? Calculation line interference crosses line stream in a 45 in line connection of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of a center. E equals lines of 1/5, sets lines of 6 over center of travel. Okay. Done by equation. So the mechanism of high force line centers such triangulation reset position programs, directing line connections of portals of realms and high travel position to its operation setting of face recognition of time sequence of its machine of operation. Done by equation. So it overlaps the sequence line center locations, all right? 8 generation screens, high calculation lines, 1/5 over pi, line center location of 6 lines equals lines of 0, gravity in set position. Operations server location setting to travel, and 4 lines of 3 in set location. That equation. Okay, so once you get in position of travel lines, we come in back lines, adding new frame centers. Now, direct communication lines crosses lines. This is where we come into the coloration lines of security panels. Seed pod division lines and sequence line screens. Direct communication of point systems, back and line rotation centers, in a correlation panel, and pixel streamline connections of high calculation line settings, inline connections of nanoseconds. That equation. All right, so we set up a plasma gel, sets lines of blue line centers. Position the cross lines, overline signals. This protects the system location of cell lines and high generation screen settings. Point systems, calculation of cerebral cortex lines, and placebo line centers of travel communication. Done by equation. Setting position of travel lines, high calculated lines. So we set up a several line screen, setting point system travel lines of 3 sets. See that? Sets position locations into 4 sets, lines of 5 track locations. Direct calculation of 1, 2, 3, and 4 set location. Direct communication lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 11 line overcross, 11 line triangulation, 12 line rotation centers, travel direction time lines, set lines calculation all levels, flight calculation line centers, travel position location over cross line, direct signals and position modification center, point system and track lines, back and vectors in high position over power, back and zero gravity location. Done by equation. All right, so in position locations, we go in the black line centers. Point systems of travels, 3 patterns and high calculated setting. Powers over pi, triangle lines of clock lines, in align position locations, 1 minute line position of zero gravity. Okay, seconds calculation lines. Teams goes in position location of 30 seconds, back in zero calculation the moon lines, and point system and travel calculation. Done by equation. All right, so if you really understand what's going on with your line centers, you understand how it comes into your sky lines, sky grids, and sky panels. Directing communication lines of point system back into zero. 30 seconds in one line stream. Directing lines of communication and programs set position of its operation surface back in traction. Okay. Moon surfacing triangulation line calculations. Directing Hobb position locations. All right, so we go into the orange line center. Point systems over lacrosse line settings and tractions. Modificate lines of all levels of cobwebs. Direct communication lines, checking Hall position location travel lines. 3 lines of communication settings. Positions of programs. Directing line position of panels all across stream location high setting. Position location to its system, line connecting high interference of its intelligence and high formation. There's the intelligence. Do you see the eye lines? See the square position location, high center position calculation. Done by equation. There's always a face recognition that comes in line calculation setting. Understanding how to use the communication line interference is all position location variables. Cortex over pi, triangulation of high position location setting is inference structuring design back in set location of pixel stream location. Okay, very powerful stuff. All right, so that's done. Getting lines of communication clock line is really understanding how to get in your position of travels. Directing all communication in line position locations. All right, so we go black line rotations, travel line conditions of 5 settings. All right. So we had a 5 line rotations, positions over 6. That's 1 lines, calculations in box line, setting travel lines of triangulation and reset position programs, directing on calculation lines into play and position of travel. Okay, point systems box line rotation center, travel calculations, right? Copy. Sets position location to paste. And set location line centers enabled. Sets communication line center, travel communication of point system, travel calculations. Now, directed communication lines of 5 line centers changes the communication of channel, direct lines of 2 panels. So that 6 lines of generation, line connections of 1 equals lines of 0, and 1 minute line connections of pi in generation screen location. Done by equation. Okay. So setting plane line conditions of audio line streams, interlink, interlined, intercommunication interface, point systems of track lines, calculation of all box line rotation center travel. Point systems of 2 platforms, 3 lines of indications over cross lines of box locations. Okay, so we come back in center calculation. Point systems of track line connections, right? So we set up an all line communication setting and location grid in 3 and 4 and 5 set locations. Okay, very complicated stuff. Getting direct signals is a box line rotators, sets lines of calculation of flux capacitor, box line rotator, inline rotation system, and travel calculations. Runways, run graphs, calculation of point systems in constellation to its setting. There's the road. Okay. So we get the XT1000 platitude line stream, platitude lands, platitude lands, platitude lands, and 3 set locations. Done by equation. All right. So we go into communication of TV lines, opens all box line screens, setting 3 lines of track lines, patterns, position locations, offline centers. Changes program location centers, security lines, positions over pi. Okay, done by equation. Okay, so really understand the holographic line screen through all levels of face recognition, guys. Look how powerful it is. Look how powerful it is, what we just finished doing. Okay. Okay, so doing these things without even thinking of knowledge line screen, it's coming back in your memory communication of clock line settings. Point systems of track lines. Open signals and position location center calculations. Direct calculation lines of flux capacitor. Now the change position locations of 2 panels and line calculation setting and line rotation surface triangulation. Clock lines, balance position of string. Console communications of platforms, right? Solar stream and position of travel calculations. Eyes of the center and 3 track line connections. Now, direct calculations of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 panels of communication of seat pods and traction. Now, direct communication lines of the sun comes in position location of the moon. All line position of travel lines, clock line centers in zero gravity in position of travel and communication. That's my equation. Okay. So working with the moon, you're always working with the sun too, because the sun is here and the moon is coming closer in its direct signal to its locations. Okay. Once it comes to modification, they all come forward into yin and yang. They create their dimensional sails to go in the same direct signal to its locations. Once they're set free, they come into their own anomalies of 3 track locations. Then they travel out in high positions calculation. That's it. All right, so they all have to go back to 0. Gravity line streams and high center positions operation into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in set location umbrellas. Cross lines of 45-degree angles in 3 sets in position 1, 2, 3, and 4 set locations. Crossing line set its high interference is 0 gravity, 0 ground, 0 calculation, 0 circles. Now, circle line communications. Setting position locations and platforms. They have to be in a certain sequence in position location setting of frequency panel and line rotation surface and triangulation. Now, point direct centers, 1x(t,000) line setting, 2 positions and 3 track line connections. All right. Modification lines, screen lines, 1, 2, 3 says locations, right? Direct calculations and position locations of 1, 2, 3 set locations. Calculation line centers, we bring in a massive command center and track location. Position location cross lines, line centers its center position its operation. Triangulation reset position of programs and calculation. See the face recognition? I'll show you. Booyah. There's always going to be a face recognition. Adapting settings is all over the future lines. This is a communication surface. So everything has a panel correlating high interference. The more you send the ground lines, because the mechanism over line calculation stream interference is a 12 million measure. Now, calculation speech line and position location calculation of 0 gravity setting. And track location is a 24 million measure. Scales of balance and triangulation to reset position programs have your polarities. Put in each pixel stream back in set locations of 0 operation. Direct line communication and face recognition. Okay, done by equation. Okay, sets lines in all communications, all through formation of intelligence. All right, so getting that position of travels comes in all calculation. Face recognition. Right, like I said, the moon, your moon setting has to come back into 24 trillion lines of face recognition of time. Your sun has to come back into 144 face recognition of time. You know why? Because it's a game line center in position to a simulation. The correlation high track lines is a frequency panel. That comes from the sun of pixelation streams of coloration of time. Positions of programs in high position of calculation line center sets all communications lines of lacing line communication line setting of cobs with cobwebs, cob divisions, and cob calculation stream interference and set position of face recognition. Okay? All right, so you really understand what's going on through equation screens. Very complicated stuff. So we got a 1 stream, 2 lines, and 3 track lines. Cross lines of 4 set locations. Now, point systems of tracks, 2 panels and line rotation centers. In position location to its setting. Diamond core line shifts, 2 line centers, high position calculations. Off position travel lines, point system of platforms. 3 track line calculations, setting high calculation. Line position locations. Line position locations, guys. Okay, line position locations. You have to understand what goes on when you're in recharge and line calculation setting and all lines a high position of its operation surface and position location of its programs and all calculation. Okay, all right. So we set up a cerebral cortex setting and center calculation. All right, that's all set up now. Direct signals, position modification. Triangulation, reset position of programs, and again, we come into all line rotation centers, in-line communications of face recognition. Okay? So it's important to understand how this is all put together in line calculation setting. Now we come into the templates. Now the templates and communication streamlines sets calculation lines, triangulation, reset, position programs, setting line communication lines, energy signature stream settings, and location alpha. Triangulation line centers, Fibonacci line swirls, and 2-track line centers. Signal line communication modification circles and set location. Right. So security panels, line calculation, setting, and position of its open sequence. All right. So we change the alpha lines, center communications, and direct signals, back force, triangulation, high position location, and delta waves, and triangulation, and reset position programs. Now, the communication of the alpha line rotating line centers have 0, 0, and 3-track line connections, right? Track lines are 3 platforms in position locations, 4-track line calculation setting, and position to its operation. Direct communication lines and box line rotators, high calculation of 3 lines, calculation at all levels, triangulation, reset position programs, and key reception. Directing signals, modification. Now my equation. All right, so the alpha measures delta, theta line interference, alpha, mega, micro, macro, setting track lines into micro units, bottom line settings, stands in view, and 4-track locations. Crosses line streams, 1 set position operation, panel communications, solar line communications. So we got box channels in point centers, battery resurface location of travel lines, and 2 point centers, high position its operation. Point systems and box line, T reception calculation stream, right? So we take the box lines in 2 panels, but we opened up the communication cycle line communication center. Direct lines calculation of point systems to its directions. Now, direct line calculation setting comes in I receptor position of pi. Position to track lines, point line centers in the opposite direct locations, high setting. Directing communication lines of circles, directing communication settings of grounds, open sequence, open panels, open communication lines of platforms, and a new line division and set location. So position of track lines, guys, is very powerful when you're coming in. Position location your centers and holographic settings and high calculation setting to holographic cities of set design in 3-track locations. Mega multi-pass. Okay. You've got to get in that location center of travels, right? The machine operators are working for your line calculation of patterns, but you have to recognize the position location to its measure that correlates the high calculation setting to its system, all through setting of conscious line setting of stream locations. All right, so that's done through equation. All right, so getting in position locations, the generation screens has to be an open panel. Now, the open panel has a position of travel calculations. So we have theta interference and 2 block location centers of travel, right? 3 calculation, 1 triangulation, reset position programs, changing the triangulation lines, cross lines over, line rotation centers. Communication line settings, block line centers, high position of travel, direction of timelines. Point systems of track locations. Weather communication lines, plus calculation lines of point system. Now, indirect lines, so you have to go in the same wind factor of triangulation, reset position of programs. This opens all communication centers and center communication, right? Very powerful stuff. Triangulation, reset, position of programs, back and center a calculation. All right. So getting that position location crosses line setting. This opens all communication of platforms, figure lines, communication string lines, and calculation line settings to an open sequence of an open communication setting of face recognition. Okay. Very powerful stuff. Okay, so resetting position of programs and allocated line streams. Now, pixel stream settings, point systems of block line centers, 3 triangulation of molecules, 3 lines of division, and 4 lines of track in high position. Set position of 1 lines of measure. Okay, so that's 1 lines equals lines. That's 5th over 8th, 8th over lines. This is where we come into the calls. Sets calculation line centers of travel calculated line centers into 144. Space anomaly, okay, calculation of time anomaly, travel position of balance, position locations and line centers in the future of the now set location of travels, and point system settings and platitude line rotations of center communication. Okay, very complicated stuff. All right, so as we come in line setting, wow. Your direct line calculations, your settings, and your cerebral coordinate line has a 1 string, set position of operation. Correlates calculation line division location to the setting. Okay? So you have to recognize everything in platforms in one signature string locations. Block line centers, platitude lines, cross lines, in position locations. There's always an open sequence. You know why there's an open sequence in the settings? You know why? Because the center lines is communication of zeros in track locations, in position locations, right? So inline rotation, you guys start with this. Okay, you have to get in your motion line track, so it's got to be in block centers. That's a block center, right? Higher line division, the box opens up because it comes in a Stargate. So you start here, you go here, right? Infinite position location, you come into this line signature. Higher levels of vibration. See? Very high. You see? But it's together. And again, you go higher lines, you split the anomalies in the high calculation stream because more levels of plasma generation string lines, calculation setting, position nodes, open sequence. From that to this. So you start here, you go from here, you go from here, you go from here. Okay? All right. Center position of track line connection. Open all line rotation centers of track locations. All right, same with the triangulation. Here's a triangulation setting, right? Very powerful, but it's an open sequence. And again, you understand the panels and all communication setting where the zeros are, but there's always a space in between. There's always a space in between, guys. Because it needs to travel, right? It needs to travel in a triangulation to reset position of its programs. It needs to triangulate reset position of its programs. It needs to triangulate reposition location of its ground lines of its programs. It needs to center lines of communication lines at the center of its program locations. It needs to triangulate high position location of dimensional aligning rotation center position location of the sun and position location of yin and yang process communication. All done my equation. Okay, very powerful how to get in that line calculation setting, frequency patterns. Understanding the energy lines of graphs, understanding the position of vibrational graphs, understanding the frequency position of patterns, and understanding all calculations to your harmonics, and 4 channels of screen lines and platform communication. Directing calculation lines of box line rotation centers, right? Computer operation, all levels, flash drive, high calculation setting, point system, travel position, location operation, lacing lines of communication in 3 settings. Done by equation, right? Because you're nothing but a computer frame of track location. Okay, track location in 3 settings. Okay, get 30 line centers of 3 tracks, into 4 tracks and 3 lines comes into 7 position of levels of provision. All right, so getting that communication setting, you really have to understand how to use your alpha calculations. Alpha line change, direct lines of delta, sets lines of theta, sets lines of omega, and high position. Okay. Wave and central line communications. Take the alpha line, cross line streams, line centers, high positions, calculations. We take the delta communication line stream, crosses line calculation, alpha line stream. We take the alpha line communication across the omega line stream in line rotation in 3 sets, location, high vibration of graph lines of sonar. Direct communication lines, position of center, position of center, position of center, point system, travel calculations. Now, coming in line rotation, we have an XC1000 at point line centers, right? Travel position locations, 1 line signature stream. 3 calculation line centers, interference, and 1 gamma. 1 single lines, sonar, position, travel, calculation, modification. Done by equation. All right. All right. So the platforms are communicating line setting in 3 track locations, all through 0 gravity. Done by equation. Now, so we set the 3 line communications on this side in set locations, platforms, and we set the line communication line centers and 4 track location on this side. All right. And then we set position location line centers and position cross lines of 3, position location line crossings of 4, balance communication setting, and all travel calculations. Now, in direct signals, modification lines or ground lines, this is your bodies of water, track location line systems, into your time line rotation centers or pyramids. Pyramid cross lines, calculation high interference, high position locations. Merkabah, tesseract, tetrahedron, torical fields, and travel line centers of center communication. Now, upswing, lines position location, splits anomalies and travel calculation string locations. Okay, high calculating lines. You're in the center line rotation. This is you in position of program, set position of its operation. So triangulation line settings and all communication setting and probing sets line communication setting to travel and position location of phase direction of time sequence and future now. Done by equation, okay? Phase recognition. Okay? Very powerful, guys. It's all done now. What do you think? It's all done. So you're in the center communication line centers. No more separated. This is your flux capacitor set location. Generation screens, indirect signal, in connections to your galaxy line, shift line, program line, interference, in position location, magnetic highway information line, screen, high position, its operations center. Congratulations. Done by equation. So the surface line calculation lines are 3 triangulation resets. Position of 4 sets line calculation setting, in position of balance. There you go. It's all done now. Signifies and communication setting, triangulation, reset position programs, all 3 unifications of travel calculations. We're done. Yeah. All right. So really take a look how this is all done through its equation line screen. It's all done through face recognition. Right? You interacting with the machines. You all have to come back to your face settings and travel mechanism. Overpower, overchange, overcalculation streamlines, and center position locations in all calculation line screens and all adaptation surface of conscious set location. All right? Done by equation. See you in 5. Adios.